Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Ben, missional listener in Dorset, and real privileged to be able to join loads of you I've never met before on here. Usually when I'm on Baptist ones, I'm playing Guess Who with someone else, a friend, and but I'm giving you the respect you deserve and listening to everybody sing. Do you want me to just go for it, James?
Yes, please, Ben.
Okay, so what I wanted to share with you guys today is a little bit about my journey to missional listening and some of the things I've learned on the way, but with one great proviso really, which is again like Eryl, I don't have any answers. I certainly don't have a model that I can roll out across the country, and the ongoing learning is part of the posture. So please, anything I say that sounds great, it really isn't. It's all fragile, but God's been good. What I want to do is, once I tell you my story, I want to do it a little bit by looking at the sending of the 70 or 72, depending on what Bible you've got, and allowing that to tell the story as well. Because like the disciples in the sending of the 70, 72, I had a calling verse that sent me into the ministry. Mine was, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, teach them everything I've taught you, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I will be with you always. And that verse sent me into the Baptist ministry, where I went to college as a pioneer and came out the other end a teacher pastor. Not quite sure how that works. So my place of discipling all nations became the church and that number of people that I was called to minister to. And in many ways, that part of my journey was successful. And I say successful in the sense that I could tick the boxes that head office wanted me to tick. The church grew in numbers. We had baptisms, we had dedications, all the things they wanted to know. Until one year, my last year of being a teacher pastor of a Baptist church. And it was going to be the first year, but I hadn't baptized anyone, and as Baptists would baptize believers. And this led to a meltdown for a couple of reasons. The first was I came in the ministry because I wanted to see people who had no idea of a God who loved them come to know Jesus as Lord and Saviour. And so to have a year where nobody had learnt that from our from our community really made me edgy. The thing that made me most meltdown though was I felt a sense I needed to write down all the people I had baptized, and there was 46. And as I wrote down every name, I realized that only one of them was what we would call conversion. Everybody else was either biological growth, children that had come through the church, people that had moved churches to come to ours, or people who were a bit stupid like me and gave it all up and came back. And I suddenly realized that the way I'd been doing church had led to just one person really finding out this God that I was so desperate for people to know. So me and the church went on a 6-month journey asking the question about how we might start to reach 3rd or 4th generation non-Christians, and how they might become a central part of a vibrant Christian community. In those 6 months, I made not a blind bit of difference to the church, which is a great church, by the way, but it made all the difference to me as I came to the conclusion that it was very nearly impossible for a 3rd or 4th generation non-Christian to become a part of our community and end up as in the centre of it. It was almost impossible because of the culture we had, the language we used, and such like. So the conclusion led me on a journey. Crikey, what am I meant to do? My spiritual director said, Ben, a dangerous question this, but if finances and family practicalities weren't an issue, what would you be doing? And I've always had an answer to that question, which is I'd be hanging out in villages in West Dorset, Dorset as a whole, where the church is in such bad decline and so many of our villages are unsupported spiritually. And when I said that to her, she said, Ben, I think that's what you should be doing. A few miracles later, we moved to Dorset, where if trends continue, there probably won't be a rural church in 10 or 20 years' time, because the average congregation is probably about 10, in many places less, and in some places the dizzy heights of about 30 or 40. We found ourselves in a village which was a mental health hospital, and now it's a housing estate where the hospital's been turned into flats. And we came here because there's no visible presence of church. We're not stepping on anybody's toes, I don't think. And as I got here, I learned that Christianity was banned from the village. Two churches had tried to church plant in what we have as a beautiful ballroom where the patients and nurses used to dance. And churches had been in that and thought this would be a great place for 500 gathered church services. And they came and did carol service and preached about hell. And the conclusion was that they were asked not to come back. And every single community celebration was now to be done secular with no religious connotations. But before I judged them, as I started missional listening, I realized that I had no idea what I was doing. I brought with me all my agendas and all of my insecurities, and as a result had all the wrong questions and not enough answers. I had all the wrong questions because at the beginning of missional listening, I was thinking to myself, how do I make myself sustainable in a few years? How do I carry on being paid so I can support my 4 kids who are outside in the garden now having World War III? How do I attract people to come to what I'm going to do in the villages rather than go into town? What might my services look like? All the wrong questions. And I also realized quite early on, as I hung around the 94% not in church and probably the 90% who have no intention of ever going, I didn't have any answers. I was playing cricket and I got promoted to the first team, even though I'm sort of fat and blind, I'm still not bad. And I was playing with all these 19, 20-year-old lads, and I realized that I was just shocked by their conversation, appalled, particularly by the way they talked about women. There was one time I was playing, and one of the lads said he was off to Weston-super-Mare that night, and I asked why, and he said, well, I've slept with everybody on Tinder between us, but I now have to drive 2 hours to the next stop. And I realized that he's not going to come on my Alpha course. He's not going to come and listen to me preach or join in my songs about how Jesus is beautiful. And I realized I didn't have any answers. So I ran away on a retreat for a week to Buckfast Abbey, collapsed in a heap, put my arms out and said, my hands are empty. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. And Jesus showed me that was just where he wanted me. And he reminded me that that was how the disciples were on the boat at the end of John. What have you caught? Nothing. Our nets are empty. We've caught nothing. So I asked Jesus then to just show me what he might ask me to do. And God gave me a different set of questions as I began missional listening. I called them my Brueggemann, Newbigin, Brueggemann, Roxburgh mashup, which were, what's the cry of the village? What's the cry of each village? Because they're different in each. The second question was, what might it look like if the kingdom of God came today? Or if you like, what does the biblical imagination want to say to this? And the third question was simple. What does it look like to be a group of people asking the first 2 questions and may that be church? But the first question I needed to ask was, why was no one coming? Why were people not going to church? Could it be that it's had its day? Could it be that people just don't need it? But what I learned in my first year is what Jesus said to the 72, the harvest is plentiful. I suffer with anxiety, and in particular medical anxiety. So if you were to tell me an ailment, I start to feel it. But not only do I feel your ailments, I start to go on a process that leads me down to usually open brain surgery or something like that. So for me, I'm always quite anxious about medical. I had a particularly difficult dentist appointment, which led to me panicking for a few hours. I fell asleep when I got home, and for the first time, I woke up and life was still dark. I still couldn't get myself out of the anxious mindset. I went to receive some very wacky, charismatic, Bethel-like prayer ministry, which the storm was still there, but I was able to just be grounded again in the love of God that gave me the courage to face my fears. But as I walked around the community, people said, Ben, how are you? And I was able to say, actually, I'm struggling. I'm really anxious at the moment. I'm really not in a good place. And that vulnerability, that posture, opened the doors to other people's vulnerability. And I heard about dementia and poverty and brokenness and divorce and depression and despair. I realized it's true that everybody's okay until you get to know them. And everybody has their stuff and their brokenness. The harvest is plentiful. Everyone is broken. So I would say to them, what do you do with that? And I heard all sorts of answers: yoga, spiritual gurus, Ouija boards, tarot cards. I've heard the lot. And I never heard the answer, I pray. And I said, out of interest, I said, I pray, I'm a Christian, and I find that helps. Have you ever been offered that? And none of them had ever been offered prayer. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. There are very few people able to go into our communities to the broken and offer them the peace that we have in God by praying. So we go, but we go with a posture of vulnerability. We take very little with us, Jesus says. No wallet, no second cloak, no spare pair of sandals. He wants us to have the posture that Jesus had at the well, which is, please, can I have some water? He wants us to need the neighbour in our life, to realise that we're not alive until we're with them. He wants us to treat them not as a missional target, but someone to do life with. Not someone to do things for or to, but to do life with. Not a missional target, but our missional conversation partners. And we realise as we have that conversation that they are discipling us and teaching us who God is. And somehow we find permission to disciple them. Jesus goes on. Twice he says the next one is radical, and he wants them to do it. Eat what's put in front of you. The most outrageous thing to say to the Jews, eat what's put in front of you. And he's calling us to join in with the culture, join in with those we live with, even join in with some of those things that we spent our life praying against. And to do so in such a way, we offer the counter narrative of God, that another way is possible. And that way is the way of Jesus. And as we do those things, we get to see all sorts of things. Like in Cholton Down, this village, how everywhere is broken, people are divided, every group that's set up ends in tears, divorce rate is high, and mental health is crazy. But as we hear it, we also get given invitations by the community to bring healing. Like my wife being asked to take over the broken toddler group about to close, and now has over 80 families, and is a sign of hope that this will be the entire village. Like for me, being able to join a hall committee that now is beginning to build a cafe for the community, because they've noticed that the one-off events we've done, though are great, do not build Christian community. All expenses paid by community assets, not the church. When just hanging out with the local vicar gives you permission to start prayer meetings across West Dorset, and suddenly you find 40 different people wanting to pray about God's kingdom coming. All this missional listening has led me to a future dream that I think is now sped up because of the coronavirus. That we as the church have permission to stop living in Babylon and do this thing called church differently. We're now allowed to stop tinkering at the edges, making it slightly better or more attractive, but to embark on a new adventure where church is no longer a one-off event, but a group of believers following Christ and living it out all week, where all are welcomed and discipled. If keeping power and our services entertaining, we will always come second to the big church in town. And even if we manage to grab them, we're only reaching 10% of the population. Here in the rural, we have a chance to do it differently, to go after the 90%, to live authentic community in such a way that God becomes real by the way we live, and that outpours to the community that we serve. The future is ecumenical, no more barriers. The future is lay. The future is vulnerability and humility. The future is joining in where God is at work, rather than being really busy and asking him to bless it. But my feeling is the future is exciting, but may it be soon, because the harvest is so plentiful and the workers are few.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. That's been great. Can I ask a question? What has been the hardest aspect of the ministry you've done, and how have you got through that since you started being a missional listener?
The hardest thing by far is me, and just realizing that I'm a minister before I'm a disciple, and wanting to constantly build something that I can celebrate, or to get myself a job, to get my worth by, you know, numbers. So for me, the hardest thing has been the whole unlearning this whole, if I could say, evangelical upbringing that I've had, and being able to sort of lay that aside. Not completely, I still believe in much of what I used to believe in, but just be able to lay that aside so that I can see the bigger gospel, and to see that Sunday morning isn't what it's all about. So for me, the most difficult thing's been identity, and the real truthful answer, James, is that I'm still coming through that. The biggest step I made was stop going to church, which I did after my first year, and that was the most helpful sense. I also think that just being vulnerable with people has allowed me to learn from them and to learn that. And the other thing I would say is that we now have a community of about 10 of us on a Thursday night. We used to eat around the dinner table, now we do it over Zoom. It's the most beautiful Christian community I've been a part of. And my last church was sort of 500 strong, and this is the most beautiful. So that's encouraged me that I'm finding more life in what I'm doing now than I ever did before. I had a lack of joy in ministry before. I love what I do now, but it's amazing that even now during the coronavirus, I still fall back to type, and the type isn't what I'm called to be. But that's the hardest journey, and I have to keep going on it. And people like Eryl and Pete have heard me talk about this all the time. I'm constantly trying to fight this fitting in with the crowd and doing things the way I'd always done and the way others are doing it.
Thank you, Ben. I have a question that's come through for Eryl. And the question, Eryl, is Eryl, how do you sustain a community like the Celtic worships in between the regular gatherings at the Hilltop Church near Conway? How does that happen, Eryl?
That's a really good question. It's in a couple of ways, really. One was ridiculously simple, and I didn't realise that we hadn't done it before, which was, can you leave, if you'd like to keep in touch, would you like to leave your email at the back of church? Which is, and I thought, well, why haven't I done that before in a town that gets so many visitors and all of that kind of thing? And so MailChimp, we would keep putting out things about what we were doing, and then bit by bit, people going, oh, it's Eryl that's doing that, or what have you, and then you'd start a conversation, and that has become, through coronavirus, actually daily reflections. And different people's voices have come out from that, and then that's had legs. And although the mechanism of daily reflections at the moment is quite something, actually different people's voices on the daily reflections has been stunning. And I think that now those daily reflections are going out to, although different legs. There's somebody in Africa, there are a few people in Belgium, there are a few people in America, what have you, all who discovered something in Llangollen. And I've been wrestling with, so have we started a new worshipping community or not? Because people have come in and had it as a resource. But it's really interesting that they feel they've got an association. They feel that they're part of a community, and therefore who am I to question that? I feel that we're just being used by God. So throw the rule book out, Eryl. Don't be concerned, and just keep that going. So friendships have happened, and other kinds of activities have happened between monthly services. But again, they haven't been join Llangollen, and it's only Llangollen people who do this. Last year, we wanted to explore, is this a community not? And we worked our way through the 7 sacred spaces of George Ling's. And it was really interesting. a really, really interesting ride. But then decided in refectory evenings, which we would have here in our house, that actually we as a group would just keep on giving and giving that once a month because of the permeable nature of the walls. And we didn't want to become anything that looked like it was membership. But certainly refectory evenings, that sense of gathering around the table and an open invitation was another way of keeping that going.
Elizabeth, thank you, Eryl. Elizabeth, would you like to introduce Shalom now?
Yep, Shalom is our next speaker. She's